Shy employee left a note on her boss's car, never expecting he'd fall completely in love with her. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The morning sun filtered through the towering glass windows of Morrison and Reed Marketing Agency, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Chicago high-rise. Savannah Brooks sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over her keyboard as she watched the office slowly come to life around her. She'd arrived early, as usual, a habit that allowed her to savor these quiet moments before the day's chaos began. At 27, Savannah had already earned a reputation as one of the agency's most innovative minds, even if few people realized it. Her ideas often reached the boardroom through others' voices. Her creativity filtered through louder personalities who commanded more attention, but she didn't mind. Not usually. There was a certain power in being underestimated, in watching and waiting from the shadows. The elevator doors chimed, and Savannah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to look up to know who had arrived. The sudden shift in energy throughout the office told her everything. Julian Cross strode through the main doors, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone except her. At least, that's what she wanted him to think. She kept her eyes fixed on her screen, but her other senses were attuned to his movement. The subtle tap of his Italian leather shoes against the floor, the faint scent of his cologne as he passed by her desk, the way conversations dulled to whispers in his wake. At 38, Julian had the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. "Morning meeting in 10 minutes, he announced, his voice carrying across the office without effort. "Bring your A-game. The Henderson account isn't going to win itself." Savannah gathered her tablet and notes, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Inside her folder was the presentation she'd spent weeks perfecting, a campaign that could revolutionize Henderson's entire market approach. She'd thought of everything, the demographic shifts, the emerging social media trends, the subtle psychological triggers that could transform casual browsers into loyal customers. The conference room filled quickly, junior executives and creative directors jostling for positions around the massive oak table. Savannah chose a seat near the middle, not hiding in the back, but not drawing attention to herself either. Perfect for observing, Julian stood at the head of the table, his dark grey suit impeccably tailored, his presence filling the room. "Let's hear what you've got," he said, his eyes scanning the faces around him. When his gaze passed over Savannah, she felt a flutter in her stomach, but her expression remained neutral. One by one, her colleagues presented their ideas. Some good, some mediocre, all safe. Savannah waited for her turn, her heart beating a steady rhythm against her ribs. When she finally stood, tablet in hand, she felt rather than saw Julian's attention sharpen. "The Henderson brand needs more than just a facelift," she began, her voice soft but clear. "It needs to speak to the soul of the modern consumer." She walked them through her presentation, each slide a carefully crafted piece of her vision. But halfway through, she noticed the familiar signs, the subtle shifts in posture, the glances at phones, the polite but distant smiles. Even Julian's expression had taken on that slightly glazed look she'd seen so many times before. "Thank you, Savannah," he cut in smoothly, before she could reach her conclusion. "Who's next?" The meeting continued, but Savannah barely heard it. Something had snapped inside her, a quiet thread of patience that had been stretching for too long. As everyone filed out of the conference room, she remained behind, watching through the glass walls as Julian gathered his things from his office. She saw him head toward the parking garage, and before she could talk herself out of it, she followed. His car, a sleek black Audi, was parked in its usual spot. Savannah pulled out her notebook, tore off a piece of paper, and wrote the words that had been burning in her mind. "Nem sempre que me está calado está ausente. Às vezes está só esperando ser ouvido." Not always who remains silent is absent. Sometimes they're just waiting to be heard. Her handwriting was neat but distinctive, a reflection of her personality. She folded the note carefully and, after a quick glance around, slipped it through the slight gap in his driver's side window. Walking back to the elevator, Savannah felt something shift inside her, a small spark of defiance, of hope, of possibility. She hadn't signed the note. She didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful messages were the ones left unsigned, like whispers in the dark, waiting to be discovered. As she returned to her desk, she caught her reflection in the window, a beautiful young black woman with quiet strength in her eyes and secrets in her smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, even if only by herself. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines, but beneath it all, Savannah felt a current of anticipation. She had lit a match in the dark. Now all she could do was wait to see what kind of fire it would catch. Julian Cross sat in his parked Audi, staring at the folded piece of paper in his hands. He'd found it when he left the office late that evening, tucked neatly between his window and the rubber seal. The handwriting was elegant, assured, like its message. Not always who remains silent is absent. Sometimes they're just waiting to be heard. The words stirred something in him, a recognition he couldn't quite place. His mind wandered back through the day's meetings, lingering on moments he'd previously dismissed. The quiet intensity in Savannah Brooks' eyes as she presented her Henderson campaign, the careful way she'd arranged her materials, the subtle confidence in her posture that he'd somehow failed to notice before. He tucked the note into his jacket pocket and started the engine, but didn't leave immediately. Instead, he found himself replaying more moments from the past few months. How many times had he cut short her presentations? How many ideas had he overlooked simply because they weren't delivered with the usual aggressive confidence he'd come to expect? The next morning, Julian arrived earlier than usual. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in shades of pink and gold. His eyes drifted to the open office space beyond his glass walls, settling on Savannah's empty desk. Within an hour, she would arrive, always early, always prepared, always silent. When she did appear, he found himself studying her with new interest. She moved through the office with a grace he'd never properly appreciated before, exchanging warm but brief smiles with colleagues, her focus already on the day ahead. She wore a deep purple blazer that complemented her skin tone perfectly, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that spoke of both professionalism and pride. "Good morning, Mr. Cross," she said as she passed his office, her voice carrying that same quiet assurance he'd detected in the note. "Savannah," he replied, the name feeling different on his tongue today. "I've been thinking about your Henderson presentation." She paused, turning to face him fully. For a moment, their eyes met, and Julian felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. "I believe we cut you off too soon yesterday," he continued. "I'd like to hear the rest of your ideas. My office, 11 o'clock. A slight widening of her eyes was the only indication of her surprise. "Of course," she replied, composure perfect as always. The morning crawled by as Julian tried to focus on other matters. He found himself watching Savannah through his office windows, noticing things he'd somehow missed before. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when deep in thought. How other team members seemed to gravitate toward her desk, seeking her opinion in hushed conversations. The subtle authority she commanded without ever raising her voice. At 11 precisely, she knocked on his door. "Come in," he called, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Show me everything." This time, as Savannah walked him through her campaign, Julian truly listened. Her ideas were revolutionary, a perfect blend of data-driven strategy and creative insight. She spoke of consumer psychology with a depth that surprised him, her soft voice growing more animated as she explained her vision. "The key is authenticity," she explained, pulling up a mock-up on her tablet. "Henderson's products are excellent, but their current marketing feels manufactured. We need to tell real stories, show real connections, like this." She showed him a concept board that took his breath away. Simple, elegant, powerful. It captured everything Henderson had been trying to achieve for years. This is, he paused, searching for the right words. This is exceptional work, Savannah. The smile that bloomed across her face transformed her entirely, and Julian felt something shift in his chest. Had she always been this luminous? Thank you, Mr. Cross. Julian, he corrected automatically. Call me Julian. That afternoon, he called an impromptu team meeting. Savannah presented her campaign again, this time without interruption. Julian watched his team's reactions, the gradual shift from polite attention to genuine engagement, the growing excitement as they recognized the brilliance of her strategy. Later, as the office emptied for the day, Julian stood at his window again. He pulled out the anonymous note as reading it one more time. Then, making a decision, he walked to the office bulletin board and pinned a response. Some voices carry power not in their volume, but in their truth. I'm listening now. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. As he returned to his office, he caught a glimpse of Savannah at her desk, her eyes fixed on the bulletin board, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That night, as Julian drove home through the glittering Chicago streets, he felt oddly unsettled. Something had changed today, in how he saw his team, in how he saw Savannah, in how he saw himself. The note in his pocket seemed to burn with possibility, and for the first time in years, Julian Cross found himself looking forward to tomorrow with more than just professional interest. In the quiet of his car, he admitted to himself what he'd been avoiding all day. He wanted to know more, not just about the note or the brilliant campaign, but about the woman who wielded silence like a superpower, who could command attention without demanding it, who had somehow made him question everything he thought he knew about leadership. The traffic light turned red, and Julian stopped, watching pedestrians hurry past in the growing darkness. Somewhere in this city, Savannah Brooks was probably heading home too, carrying with her the quiet triumph of the day. He wondered if she knew what she'd started, not just with the note, but with her presence, her persistence, her silent strength. The light turned green, but Julian lingered for a moment longer, lost in thought. The game had changed, but he wasn't sure anymore who was playing whom. All he knew was that he wanted to see what would happen next. The Morrison and Reed office buzzed with unusual energy that morning. Savannah could feel it as soon as she stepped off the elevator. Something had shifted in the atmosphere. Her successful Henderson presentation the day before had turned heads, but it was more than that. People looked at her differently now, with a new kind of respect in their eyes. She settled at her desk, arranging her workspace with practiced precision. Her gaze drifted to the bulletin board, where Julian's response still hung, its presence like a quiet heartbeat in the room. She'd memorized the words, though she pretended not to notice them whenever others were watching. Some voices carry power not in their volume, but in their truth. I'm listening now. Savannah, Rebecca Chen, the creative director, appeared at her desk. Julian's called an emergency meeting about the Henderson campaign. Conference room in 15. The conference room filled quickly, anticipation thick in the air. Savannah chose her usual middle seat, but this time she felt the weight of more eyes on her. Julian entered last, commanding attention without effort. He carried a sleek leather portfolio she hadn't seen before, its rich brown surface catching the morning light. Yesterday, he began, his voice carrying easily across the room, we witnessed something exceptional. Savannah Brooks showed us a new vision for Henderson, one that could transform their entire market presence. He paused, his eyes finding hers. Today, we're going to build on that vision. I'm implementing a new creative challenge structure. The room stirred with interest. Julian opened his portfolio and pulled out a series of elegant black envelopes. Each week, I'll present a different creative challenge. Your solutions must be innovative, daring, and authentic, just like the Henderson campaign we saw yesterday. He began distributing the envelopes. This week's challenge is inside. You have until Friday. When he reached Savannah's seat, their fingers brushed slightly as she took the envelope. The contact was brief but electric, sending a subtle shiver up her arm. Julian's expression remained professional, but she caught the slight tensing of his jaw, the momentary darkening of his eyes. After the meeting, as people filed out discussing their envelopes, the lights flickered. Chicago's summer thunderstorms were notorious, and dark clouds had been gathering all morning. Savannah stayed behind, gathering her materials slowly, aware of Julian doing the same at the head of the table. Your idea yesterday," he said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. "How long had you been developing it?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. 3 months. I observed Henderson's customers, spent weekends in their stores, listened to people's real experiences with the brand. That level of dedication shows." He moved closer, leaning against the conference table near her chair. "Why didn't you push harder to be heard before?" The lights flickered again, more intensely this time. Before Savannah could respond, they went out completely. The conference room plunged into a grey dimness, lit only by the storm-darkened windows. "Perfect timing," Julian murmured, a hint of amusement in his voice. In the darkness, their usual office dynamics seemed to fade away. Savannah felt herself smile. "Sometimes," she said, echoing her note, "waiting for the right moment is more powerful than forcing one." A low rumble of thunder punctuated her words. Through the gloom, she could see Julian's silhouette, strong and somehow more approachable in the shadows. "And is this the right moment?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to mean more than the obvious question. Before she could answer, the building's emergency generator hummed to life. Dim backup lights cast a soft glow through the room, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt separate from the regular workday world. "I think," Savannah said carefully, standing to gather her things, "that the right moment reveals itself when both parties are ready to see it." She moved toward the door, conscious of Julian's presence behind her. As she reached for the handle, his voice stopped her. "The challenge in your envelope," he said. "It's different from the others." She turned, finding him closer than she expected. In the low light, his features were softer, more open. "I look forward to seeing your solution," he continued. "Your real solution, not what you think others want to hear." The backup lights chose that moment to brighten slightly, breaking the spell. Savannah nodded and slipped out of the conference room, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. Throughout the day, the storm raged outside their windows, but inside, a different kind of electricity charged the air. Savannah caught Julian watching her several times, his gaze thoughtful and intense. Each time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a possibility, a question neither was ready to ask. That evening, after most of the office had emptied, Savannah finally opened her black envelope. Inside, she found not a marketing challenge, but a single question written in Julian's strong hand. "What would you say if silence wasn't an option?" She traced the words with her fingertip, feeling the slight indentations in the paper where his pen had pressed. Outside her window, lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in brief, brilliant flashes. In that light, Savannah saw her reflection, a woman on the verge of something life-changing, holding the key to her own voice. She pulled out her notebook and began to write, letting the storm's energy fuel her words. This time, she wouldn't hold back. This time, she would let her truth flow as freely as the rain that painted patterns on the windows of their tower in the sky. Dawn painted Chicago's skyline in watercolor hues as Savannah stood in the empty elevator, her finger hovering over the button for the top floor. In her bag, a cream-colored envelope carried her response to Julian's challenge. She'd spent half the night crafting it, pouring truth onto paper in a way she never had before. The elevator doors opened to a silent office floor. At this early hour, even the usual early birds hadn't arrived. Savannah moved quietly through the space, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She approached Julian's office, her heart keeping time with her steps. His door was unlocked. He never locked it, trusting in the building's security. She slipped inside, breathing in the subtle scent of leather and cologne that seemed to permeate the space. On his immaculate desk, she placed her envelope, propped against his laptop, where he couldn't miss it. Just as she turned to leave, movement caught her eye. Through the glass walls, she saw Julian stepping out of the other elevator earlier than usual. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. He walked toward his office with measured steps, his expression unreadable. Savannah stood her ground, though her pulse quickened with each step he took. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and rich in the morning quiet. "Good morning." Julian's eyes fell to the envelope on his desk. "Your response?" "Yes." Savannah moved toward the door, pausing as she passed him. "You asked what I would say if silence wasn't an option. I hope you're ready to hear it." She left him there, feeling his gaze follow her to her desk. Through the glass walls, she watched as he picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands before carefully opening it. The office gradually filled with life around them, but Savannah remained acutely aware of Julian reading her words. She'd written about more than just marketing strategies or creative visions. She'd written about the power dynamics that silenced subtle voices, about the assumptions people made based on presentation rather than substance, about the strength it took to remain authentic in a world that rewarded conformity. Mid-morning, her computer pinged with a calendar invitation. Lunch meeting, 12:30 p.m., rooftop garden. The Morrison and Reed building's rooftop garden was rarely used in winter, but summer had transformed it into an urban oasis. Savannah stepped out of the elevator at 12:30 exactly, finding Julian already there, standing among the flowering planters and modern seating areas. "Your response," he said without preamble, "was extraordinary." Savannah moved to stand beside him at the railing, looking out over the city. "Was it what you expected?" "No." He turned to face her, his expression intense. "It was better. You wrote about things I've never considered, perspectives I should have seen but didn't. Your words," he paused, choosing his next words carefully, "they made me uncomfortable in the best possible way." A warm breeze lifted a few strands of hair from Savannah's face. "Discomfort often precedes growth." "Indeed." Julian's hand rested on the railing, inches from hers. "Which is why I have another challenge for you. The Anderson Tech presentation next week. I want you to lead it." Savannah's breath caught. Anderson Tech was their biggest potential client of the year. That's traditionally the creative director's presentation. "Traditionally," Julian agreed. "We've done a lot of things that might need questioning, unless you don't feel ready." The subtle challenge in his voice made her smile. "Oh, I'm ready. But are you ready for what happens when I stop being silent?" Something flickered in Julian's eyes, admiration, anticipation, and something deeper he quickly masked. "I'm counting on it." They spent the next hour discussing the Anderson Tech presentation, their usual professional dynamic charged with new energy. Julian shared insights about the client, while Savannah outlined her initial ideas, their conversation flowing with an ease that felt both natural and exciting. As they prepared to return to the office, Julian stopped her with a gentle touch to her arm. "Savannah," she turned, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you," he said softly, "for making me listen." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Julian's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. They returned to their respective roles, boss and employee, mentor and protégé, but something had fundamentally changed. That afternoon, Savannah threw herself into preparation for the Anderson Tech presentation. She could feel Julian watching her through his office windows, his gaze a tangible presence that both unnerved and energized her. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and in those brief moments, the rest of the office seemed to fade away. As evening approached, most of the staff had left when the fire alarm system began its monthly test, filling the office with a low, pulsing sound. In the relative quiet between pulses, Savannah heard Julian's voice from his office doorway. "I have another note for you." She looked up to find him holding a small piece of paper, similar to the one she'd left on his car, what felt like a lifetime ago. "But this time," he said, placing it on her desk, "I'm not hiding behind anonymity." The note read, "Sometimes the loudest truth is the one we've been afraid to hear." Thank you for making me listen to mine. Savannah traced the words with her fingertip, just as she had done with his challenge. When she looked up again, Julian had returned to his office, but their gazes met through the glass. In that look was a promise of things to come, of barriers breaking, of voices rising, of truths finally being spoken. The fire alarm gave one final pulse before falling silent, but Savannah's heart continued its own rhythm, beating out a pattern that felt surprisingly like hope. The Anderson Tech presentation loomed like a storm on the horizon, both thrilling and terrifying. Savannah sat in her apartment that evening, surrounded by research materials and market analyses, her laptop casting a blue glow across her face. On her screen, dozens of tabs displayed Anderson Tech's history, their competitors, their successes, and their failures. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "How's the preparation going?" It was nearly midnight. The fact that he was still thinking about her work, at this hour, made something flutter in her chest. She typed back, "Still researching. Their market positioning is more complex than it appears." His response came quickly. "My office, 7 a.m. tomorrow. I'll bring coffee." Savannah smiled, remembering how just weeks ago, such a message would have filled her with anxiety rather than anticipation. Now, it felt like another step in their careful dance. The next morning, Chicago's streets were quiet as Savannah made her way to the office. The early summer sun cast long shadows between the skyscrapers, and the air held that special stillness that belonged exclusively to dawn. Julian was already there, 2 coffee cups on his desk, and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a rare sight that made him seem more approachable, more human. "Black with 1 sugar, right?" he said, pushing 1 cup toward her. She paused in the doorway. "Do you know my coffee order?" "I pay attention," he replied simply, but his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. They spent the next hour reviewing her initial concepts. Julian had pushed his chair around to her side of the desk, and their shoulders occasionally brushed as they leaned over her presentation materials. Each accidental touch sent electricity through Savannah's body, making it harder to focus on the task at hand. "Anderson Tech thinks they want flash and innovation," Julian was saying, his finger tracing a line on her market analysis. "But what they really need is authenticity," Savannah finished. "They're trying so hard to be the next big tech giant that they've lost what made them special in the first place." Julian looked at her with that intense expression she was coming to know well. "Exactly. Show me how you tell that story." Savannah pulled up her draft presentation, animated despite her lack of sleep. "Their founder started in his garage, right? But not in Silicon Valley, right here in Chicago. He was solving real problems for real Midwestern businesses. That's their strength, their truth. They don't need to be Silicon Valley, they need to be proudly Chicago." "Go on," Julian encouraged, his voice soft but eager. As Savannah outlined her vision, their coffee grew cold and forgotten. The morning light strengthened, painting Julian's office in gold, but neither of them moved to adjust the blinds. They were too engrossed in the ideas flowing between them, in the energy that sparked with each shared insight. A knock on the glass wall finally broke their bubble. Rebecca Chen stood there, eyebrows raised at finding them so close together, heads bent over Savannah's laptop. "Morning team meeting?" she reminded them. Julian straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. "Of course, we'll be right there." As they gathered their materials, Julian's hand brushed against Savannah's back, so briefly she might have imagined it, but the warmth of his touch lingered as they walked to the conference room. The day passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines, but underneath it all ran a current of excitement. Savannah could feel herself changing, growing stronger with each decision she made, each idea she defended. The quiet girl who used to let others take credit for her work was transforming into someone new, someone who commanded attention not with volume, but with presence. Late that afternoon, as summer rain tapped against the windows, Julian called her back to his office. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling up a presentation on his screen. My first major pitch, 8 years ago. Savannah leaned over his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent as she watched him click through slides. It's safe, she observed diplomatically. Julian chuckled, the sound rich and warm. It's boring. I was so focused on proving myself that I forgot to be bold. He turned in his chair, looking up at her. Don't make that mistake with Anderson Tech. Be bold. Be you. Their faces were close, too close for a professional conversation. Savannah could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could feel the magnetic pull between them growing stronger. The phone on Julian's desk rang, shattering the moment. As he answered it, Savannah stepped back, her heart racing. What was she doing? He was still her boss, still officially out of reach. That evening, as the office emptied, Savannah remained at her desk, refining her presentation. Through the glass walls, she could see Julian in his office, jacket off, tie loosened, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as frustration. Her phone buzzed with another text from him. You should go home. Get some rest. She looked up, meeting his eyes through the glass. So should you. I ordered dinner, he texted back. Chinese. Too much for one person. It was an invitation, carefully worded to give her an easy way to decline. Savannah stood, gathering her courage along with her laptop. She walked to his office, pausing in the doorway. Fortune cookies are better shared, she said softly. Julian's smile transformed his entire face, erasing the careful masks he usually wore. As they spread containers of food across his desk, their fingers brushing as they passed chopsticks back and forth, Savannah realized something profound. She wasn't just preparing for a presentation that could change her career. She was falling for the man who had finally learned to hear her silence. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, and the rain created rivers of gold on the glass. In that moment, surrounded by presentations and Chinese food, Savannah felt more herself than she ever had before. And judging by the way Julian looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, she wasn't the only one undergoing a transformation. The Anderson Tech presentation was 3 days away, and Morrison and Reed's offices hummed with nervous energy. Savannah stood in the empty conference room, running through her slides one final time. The early morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across her notes. Start again. Julian's voice came from the doorway. He looked tired but focused, his tie slightly askew. I want to hear the opening exactly as you'll deliver it. Savannah took a deep breath, centering herself. Anderson Tech began in a Chicago garage, not a Silicon Valley startup incubator. That wasn't a limitation. It was their strength. Today, we're going to show you how to turn that authentic Midwestern heritage into your greatest market advantage. Julian moved into the room, his expression thoughtful. Good, but don't just tell them, show them. He reached for the remote, his fingers brushing hers as he took it. May I? He pulled up the Chicago cityscape slide she'd created. This is your moment. When you talk about Midwestern heritage, stand here. He positioned himself by the window, the real Chicago skyline behind him. Let them see the city that built their success. Make them feel it. Savannah joined him at the window, studying the view. The morning sun glinted off neighboring buildings, creating a tableau of steel and glass that somehow felt warm, inviting, human. It's not just about location, she said softly. It's about values. Silicon Valley chases unicorns and disruption. Chicago builds things that last. Exactly. Julian's voice was closer than she expected. She turned to find him watching her with that intense look that made her breath catch. You understand them better than they understand themselves. A knock on the conference room door broke the moment. Rebecca Chen entered, carrying a stack of reports. Sorry to interrupt. Julian, the quarterly numbers are in. We'll continue this later, Julian said to Savannah, his hand briefly touching her shoulder as he left. Throughout the day, Savannah refined her presentation, each revision bringing it closer to perfection, but her mind kept wandering to those quiet morning moments with Julian, to the electricity that seemed to charge the air whenever they were alone together. Late afternoon found her in the office kitchen, staring absently into her coffee cup. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. "You missed lunch," Julian said, placing a paper bag on the counter. "Thought you might need this." Inside was a sandwich from her favorite deli 2 blocks away. The fact that he knew where she liked to eat, that he'd noticed at all, made her heart skip. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." He leaned against the counter, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "How are you feeling about Thursday? Ready? Nervous? Excited?" She smiled. "All of the above." "Good. That means you care." His voice softened. "I've been thinking about what you wrote in your response to my challenge, about authentic voices and genuine connections." The kitchen suddenly felt very small, very intimate. Savannah's pulse quickened as Julian continued, "You've changed how I see things, Savannah, not just about business, but about—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, "about what really matters." Before she could respond, voices approached from the hallway. They stepped apart naturally, professionally, but the moment lingered between them like a held breath. That evening, most of the office had emptied when the building's fire alarm went off. Not a test this time, but a false alarm that required evacuation. Savannah found herself descending 20 flights of stairs alongside Julian. "At least it's good exercise," she joked, trying to ignore how the narrow stairwell forced them to walk close together. "Always finding the positive," Julian replied, smiling. "And that's what makes you special." The word hung in the air between them as they continued down. Around the 10th floor, they heard the all-clear announcement, but neither of them turned back. "We could take the elevator up," Savannah suggested. "We could," Julian agreed, "or we could finish what we started." They walked in comfortable silence for a few more flights before Julian spoke again. "Do you remember what you wrote about silence being a choice, not a weakness?" "Yes. Sometimes," he said, his voice low and intense, "silence is also about timing, about waiting for the right moment." They reached the ground floor, emerging into the lobby where other employees were already heading back to the elevators. Julian held the door for her, and as she passed him, he spoke so quietly only she could hear. "I think our moment is coming, Savannah." The elevator ride back up was crowded with people, but Savannah barely noticed them. Her mind was filled with Julian's words, with the promise they held. As they reached their floor, he let everyone else exit first. "One more practice run tonight?" he asked as they walked back to their offices. "Yes," she agreed. "I want it to be perfect." "It already is," he said simply, "because it's authentically you." Later, as Savannah gathered her things to leave, she found a note on her desk, written in Julian's distinctive hand. "In a world of noise, your quiet strength speaks volumes. You've made me want to be worthy of hearing it." She tucked the note into her bag, next to her presentation notes, and all the other pieces of herself she was finally ready to share with the world. The Anderson Tech presentation wasn't just about winning a client anymore. It was about claiming her voice, her power, her truth. And maybe, just maybe, it was about something else too. Something that sparked in quiet moments and lingering glances, in careful words and meaningful silences. Something that felt increasingly like destiny. As she left the office that night, Savannah caught her reflection in the window. A woman transformed, standing tall, radiating quiet confidence. The Chicago skyline twinkled behind her like a constellation of possibilities, and somewhere in that tapestry of lights was a future she was finally ready to embrace. The morning of the Anderson Tech presentation dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of Morrison and Reed's top-floor conference room. Savannah arrived 2 hours early, her heels clicking against the marble floors in the empty office. She wore a tailored burgundy suit that made her feel powerful, her natural hair styled in an elegant crown that honored both her professionalism and her heritage. The conference room door opened quietly. "I knew you'd be here early," Julian said, carrying 2 coffee cups. He'd chosen a charcoal grey suit that made his shoulders look broader, his presence even more commanding than usual. "Couldn't sleep," Savannah admitted, accepting the coffee. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending familiar sparks through her body. "Nervous?" he asked, studying her face. "No," she realized, surprised by the truth of it. "For the first time, I'm just ready." Julian's smile was warm, genuine. "The Thais, they won't know what hit them." They spent the next hour going through final preparations, their movements synchronized like dancers who had rehearsed the same routine countless times. When other team members began arriving, they found Savannah and Julian deep in discussion, their heads bent close together over the presentation materials. At 9:30 sharp, the elevator doors opened to reveal the Anderson Tech delegation. Leading them was CEO Richard Anderson himself, a surprise, as he usually sent his executive team to initial presentations. He was younger than Savannah expected, maybe early 40s, with keen eyes that seemed to assess everything they landed on. "Mr. Anderson," Julian stepped forward to shake his hand. "We're honored you could join us personally. When I heard you were breaking protocol by having a junior team member lead the presentation, I had to see for myself." Anderson's eyes found Savannah. "I assume you're the one causing all the buzz." Savannah met his gaze steadily. "I prefer to let my work speak for itself, Mr. Anderson." Something like approval flickered across his face as everyone took their seats. Julian sat at the far end of the table, giving Savannah the floor completely. His presence was like an anchor, grounding her even from a distance. Taking her position by the windows, with Chicago's skyline as her backdrop, Savannah began. 16 years ago, in a garage on the south side of Chicago, Richard Anderson had a vision, not of becoming the next Silicon Valley giant, but of solving real problems for real Midwestern businesses. She clicked to her first slide, not a corporate logo or mission statement, but a photograph of Anderson's original garage workshop. The CEO sat up straighter, his expression shifting from polite interest to genuine attention. "Today, we're not here to tell you how to become the next tech unicorn," Savannah continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd cultivated all her life. "We're here to show you how your authentic Chicago roots are your greatest strength in a market saturated with Silicon Valley wannabes." For the next 45 minutes, Savannah commanded the room. She wove data and storytelling together seamlessly, presenting a vision of Anderson Tech that honored its heritage while blazing a bold path forward. Every time she glanced at Julian, she found him watching her with unconcealed pride. When she revealed the campaign's tagline, "Built in Chicago, built to last," Richard Anderson actually smiled. His executive team was furiously taking notes, exchanging meaningful looks across the table. As Savannah concluded, the room fell silent for a moment. Then Anderson stood up. "Miss Brooks," he said, "that was unlike any presentation I've seen in 20 years of business." He turned to Julian. "You were right to break protocol. When can you start?" "We'll have the contracts ready this afternoon," Julian replied smoothly, but his eyes were on Savannah, shining with something that looked remarkably like joy. The next hour was a blur of handshakes and congratulations. When the Anderson Tech team finally left, promising to return that afternoon to sign the paperwork, the office erupted in celebration. People Savannah had barely spoken to before were hugging her, praising her vision, claiming they'd always known she had it in her. Through it all, Julian kept his distance, maintaining professional decorum. But his eyes never left her, and when the crowd finally dispersed, he gestured toward his office. "A moment of your time." Savannah followed him, her body still humming with adrenaline from the presentation. Julian closed the door behind them, something he rarely did, and turned to face her. "That," he said softly, "was magnificent. You were magnificent." "I had a good teacher," she replied, matching his tone. "No." He stepped closer. "This was all you. Your vision, your voice, your truth." Another step. "I just learned to listen." They stood in the middle of his office, the morning sun painting everything in gold, success and possibility crackling in the air between them. Julian reached out slowly, deliberately, and took her hand. "Savannah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, a knock at the door forced them apart. Rebecca Chen entered with the Anderson Tech contracts, oblivious to what she'd interrupted. "Legal needs these reviewed ASAP," she announced, dropping the stack of papers on Julian's desk. "Of course," he said, his professional mask sliding back into place. But as Savannah turned to leave, he caught her eye. "We'll continue this conversation," he promised quietly. Soon, walking back to her desk, Savannah felt like she was floating. She had just landed the biggest client of the year, transformed her position in the company, and possibly, just possibly, crossed a threshold with Julian that they couldn't uncross. On her desk, she found a small note in Julian's handwriting. "Some silences speak louder than words. Some moments change everything. Tonight?" Savannah smiled, touching the words gently. Yes, some moments did change everything, and she had a feeling the biggest changes were yet to come. The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of contract signings and celebrations. By 6 o'clock, most of the office had left for an impromptu happy hour at the nearby bar, their excited voices fading down the hallway. Savannah remained at her desk, responding to congratulatory emails and trying not to watch Julian's office too obviously. He'd been trapped in back-to-back calls since the Anderson Tech team left, his jacket now discarded over his chair, sleeves rolled up as he paced behind his desk. Even distracted and slightly disheveled, he carried an air of authority that made her heart race. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "One more call. Meet me on the roof in 20 minutes. The rooftop garden was transformed in the early evening light. The setting sun painted the sky in dramatic strokes of orange and purple, while the first stars began to appear above the Chicago skyline. Savannah walked among the planters, trailing her fingers along the leaves of potted herbs, their fresh scent mixing with the cooling air. Beautiful evening. She turned to find Julian stepping out of the elevator, his tie loosened, hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it all day. He'd shed his usual polished facade, and something about his slightly rumpled appearance made him seem more real, more accessible. "I brought something to celebrate," he said, producing a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses from behind his back. "I've been saving this for a special occasion." "Landing Anderson Tech certainly qualifies," Savannah smiled, watching as he expertly opened the bottle with a soft pop. "And that's not actually what I'm celebrating." He handed her a glass, his fingers lingering against hers. "I'm celebrating you, your voice, your courage." They moved to the railing, looking out over the city as it transformed from day to night. The first sip of champagne bubbled on Savannah's tongue, making her feel light, brave. "When did you know?" she asked softly. "Know what?" "That the note was from me." Julian turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. "I think part of me knew immediately. The words carried your grace, your quiet strength." He paused, taking a sip of champagne. "But I needed time to understand what that meant, what you meant." "And now?" Savannah's heart thundered in her chest. "Now." He set his glass down on a nearby table, moving closer. "Now I understand that you've changed everything. How I lead, how I listen, how I—" He hesitated, his voice dropping lower. "How I feel." The city lights twinkled below them like earthbound stars, and a warm breeze carried the scent of the herb garden around them. Savannah felt suspended in this moment, this perfect space between what was and what could be. "There are complications," she said quietly. "Professional boundaries. Office politics." "I know." Julian's hand found hers on the railing, his thumb tracing small circles on her skin. "I've spent weeks thinking about nothing else. But tonight, watching you in that presentation room, seeing you step into your power so beautifully." He turned to face her fully. "Some things are worth the risk." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, though no rain clouds were visible. The sound seemed to echo the tension building between them, the electricity that had been gathering since that first anonymous note. "What happens now?" Savannah asked. though she could feel the answer in the way he looked at her, in the gentle pressure of his hand against hers. "Now," Julian said, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face, "we stop hiding behind notes and metaphors. We stop pretending this is just about work or mentorship or—" The elevator dinged, causing them to step apart. Rebecca Chen emerged, looking harried. "There you are. Julian, the Anderson Tech legal team has some questions about the contract language. They need you on a call right now." Julian's jaw tightened in frustration, but his professional mask slipped back into place. "Of course. I'll be right down." As Rebecca disappeared back into the elevator, he turned to Savannah. "I'm sorry. This won't take long. Will you wait?" Savannah picked up her champagne glass, offering him a small smile. "Some things are worth waiting for." His eyes darkened at her words. Quickly, before the elevator could return, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "One last note," he said, pressing it into her hand. "But after this, no more hiding." Then he was gone, leaving Savannah alone with the sunset and the city lights, and a note that felt like it might contain all her tomorrows. She unfolded it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Meet me at the Blackbird in 2 hours. No presentations, no interruptions, no professional boundaries. Just us. Finally having the conversation we've been writing in silence all these weeks." J. The Blackbird was an elegant jazz club in a historic building downtown, known for its intimate atmosphere and excellent wine list. Savannah had mentioned it once, weeks ago, during one of their late-night working dinners. The fact that he'd remembered that he'd chosen it for this moment made her smile. She looked out over the city, at all the lights and shadows and possibilities stretching before her. In a few hours, everything would change. But for now, she savored this moment of anticipation, this beautiful space between words where anything was possible. The herbs in the garden released their scent into the warming air, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again. Savannah closed her eyes, feeling the electricity in the air, in her skin, in her heart. When she opened them again, she knew exactly what she needed to do next. The Blackbird was housed in a restored 1920s building, its Art Deco facade illuminated by vintage street lamps. Savannah stood outside for a moment, taking in the elegant entrance with its brass details, catching the evening light. She'd gone home to change, choosing a deep blue dress that made her feel both confident and vulnerable, much like this evening ahead. Inside, the club was a study in sophisticated intimacy. Warm lighting from crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over dark wood panels and burgundy velvet booths. A jazz quartet played softly on the small stage, their music weaving through conversations like silk threads through fabric. Julian was already there, standing at the bar. He'd changed too. Dark suit, no tie, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him at the office. When he turned and saw her, his whole face transformed with a smile that made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said softly as she approached, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "So do you," she replied, noting how different he seemed outside the office walls. More real, more himself. He led her to a secluded booth in the corner, his hand hovering near but not quite touching the small of her back. A bottle of wine was already waiting, along with 2 glasses. "I remember you mentioning this was your favorite," he said, pouring a deep red vintage, "during that late night working on the Henderson campaign. You remember everything, don't you?" Savannah accepted the glass, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "About you." His eyes met hers over the rim of his glass. "Yes." The jazz quartet began a new song, something slow and sultry that seemed to match the mood between them. For a moment, they just sat there, letting the music fill the space where words would soon need to be. "The Anderson Tech contracts are all sorted," Julian finally said, breaking the silence. "Legal team satisfied. You've officially landed us the biggest account of the year." "Is that why we're here?" Savannah asked, though she knew the answer. "To celebrate the account." "No." Julian set his glass down, turning to face her fully. "We're here because I'm tired of pretending that what's happening between us is just professional admiration. The directness of his statement sent a shiver through her. "Julian, let me finish," he said gently. "That first note you left on my car, it didn't just make me listen to you. It made me see you, really see you. And once I started, I couldn't stop." Savannah's heart thundered in her chest. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she admitted. "I was just tired of being invisible." "You were never invisible." Julian leaned closer, his voice dropping lower. "You were intimidating." She couldn't help but laugh. "Me? Intimidating you?" "Completely." His smile was self-deprecating. Here was this brilliant, beautiful woman who didn't need to shout to command attention, who could say more with silence than others could with 1,000 words, who made me question everything I thought I knew about leadership, about connection. He paused, reaching for her hand across the table. About love. The word hung between them like a star, bright and burning. Savannah's fingers intertwined with his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. "There are complications," she said, echoing their earlier conversation on the roof. "Yes," he agreed, "and we'll need to handle them carefully. I've already spoken with HR about recusing myself from direct oversight of your work. Rebecca will handle your reviews and advancement decisions." Savannah felt a surge of emotion at his thoughtfulness, at how he'd already taken steps to protect both her career and their potential relationship. "But that's not what tonight is about," Julian continued, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Tonight is about us. No titles, no office politics. Just two people who've been writing a love story in silence for weeks." The jazz quartet switched to a slower song, the notes floating around them like falling stars. Julian stood, still holding her hand, and gestured to the small dance floor where a few other couples swayed to the music. "Dance with me." Savannah let him lead her to the floor, her body thrumming with anticipation. His hand settled on her waist, proper but intimate, as they began to move to the music. The scent of his cologne wrapped around her, familiar now but somehow more intoxicating in this setting. "I've imagined this," he confessed, his voice low near her ear. "All those late nights in the office, watching you work, wanting to tell you." "Tell me what?" she whispered, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her, in the quickening of his breath when she moved closer. "That you've awakened something in me I thought was long dormant. That your quiet strength speaks louder than any shout. That I'm falling in love with you, Savannah Brooks, and I don't want to stop." The music swelled around them, but Savannah barely heard it over the roaring of her heart. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, seeing in them everything she'd been feeling these past weeks. "Oh, what if I don't want you to stop either?" Julian's hand tightened on her waist, and the world seemed to narrow to just this moment, just them. The careful distance they'd maintained all these weeks dissolved with each beat of the music, each shared breath. "Then we write our next chapter together," he said softly. "No more notes, no more silence, just truth." As they swayed to the music, surrounded by golden light and jazz notes and the electricity of newfound honesty, Savannah felt something settle in her soul. This wasn't just about romance or career or finding her voice. It was about finding someone who heard the music in her silence, who saw the strength in her subtlety, who loved her not despite her quiet nature, but because of it. The night stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and promises and words finally ready to be spoken, and somewhere in the city above, stars twinkled like the lights in Julian's eyes when he looked at her, like the hope blazing in her heart as they danced toward their future together. 3 months after that transformative night at the Blackbird, Savannah stood in the Morrison and Reed conference room, watching the Chicago sunrise paint the sky in shades of possibility. The room had changed, or perhaps she had. Where she once saw intimidating corporate power, she now saw opportunity. Where she once felt the need to shrink, she now stood tall. The Anderson Tech campaign had exceeded all expectations, bringing in a wave of new clients who wanted what Savannah called authentic marketing. Her approach had transformed not just her own career, but the entire agency's direction. Today, she would present their new company vision to the board, Ready? Julian's voice came from the doorway. They had mastered this dance over the past months, maintaining professional boundaries at work while nurturing their personal relationship outside of it. Rebecca Chen had taken over as Savannah's direct supervisor, and the transition had been smoother than anyone expected. "Born ready," Savannah replied, catching his reflection in the window. He wore the proud smile she'd come to know so well, the one that said he believed in her completely. The boardroom filled quickly with executives and senior partners. Savannah took her position at the head of the table, elegant in a cream suit that complemented her skin tone perfectly. Julian sat at the far end, just as he had during the Anderson Tech presentation that had changed everything. 3 months ago, she began, her voice clear and confident. A single note started a revolution in how we approach marketing. Today, I'm going to show you how that revolution is reshaping our entire industry. As she presented the numbers, client growth, campaign successes, market penetration, Savannah felt the familiar electricity of a room hanging on her every word, but now it energized rather than intimidated her. She owned her power, her voice, her truth. "The future of marketing isn't about being the loudest voice in the room," she concluded. "It's about being the truest voice in the conversation." The board's approval was unanimous. As people filed out, offering congratulations and handshakes, Savannah caught Julian watching her with that intense gaze that still made her heart skip. Later that evening, they stood together on the rooftop garden, where so many of their important moments had unfolded. The herb garden had flourished in the summer heat, filling the air with fragrant memories. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "One last note." Savannah took it, smiling at the familiar texture of the paper. Inside, she found a collection of all their previous notes, carefully preserved, along with a new one. Sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the most profound changes. "You've transformed not just our agency, but my entire world. Thank you for teaching me to listen with my heart. Forever yours, Julian." "I thought we agreed on no more notes," she teased, though her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Consider this an epilogue." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Or maybe a prologue to our next chapter." The city stretched out below them, a tapestry of lights and shadows and endless possibilities. Savannah thought about the woman she'd been just months ago, writing that first anonymous note. She'd been looking for her voice then, not realizing she'd had it all along. "You know what I love most about our story," she said, leaning into him. "That we built it word by word, silence by silence, truth by truth. And now—" Julian's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "And now we write the rest together." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the familiar spark at the contact. "No more hiding, no more waiting, just us, being exactly who we are." The summer breeze carried the scent of herbs and possibility around them. In the distance, a jazz saxophone played, its notes floating up from the Blackbird, where they still went dancing every Friday night. Savannah thought about journeys, how some led you outward into the world, while others led you inward to your truth. Her journey had done both. She'd found her voice, her power, her place in the world. But more importantly, she'd found someone who heard the music in her silence, who saw the strength in her subtlety, who loved her exactly as she was. "I have an idea for our next campaign," she said, smiling up at him. "Something about how the biggest changes often start with the smallest gestures, a note, a whisper, a moment of genuine connection." "Sounds perfect," Julian murmured, pulling her closer. "Just like you." As they stood there, wrapped in each other in the Chicago twilight, Savannah felt the rightness of it all. She'd started this journey looking for her voice, only to discover that true power wasn't about volume, it was about authenticity. True love wasn't about grand gestures, it was about quiet understanding. And true success wasn't about being the loudest in the room, it was about being undeniably, unshakably yourself. The city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, not as a warning now, but as an affirmation. Savannah Brooks had found her voice, her love, her truth, and she had done it all by embracing the power of silence, the strength of subtlety, and the courage to be herself. Julian's lips found hers in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Above them, the first stars of evening emerged, bearing witness to a love story written not in grand declarations, but in quiet moments, meaningful glances, and the spaces between words where the heart speaks loudest. They had started with a note, moved through silence, and arrived at truth, and now, together, they would write whatever came next, one authentic moment at a time. The end. If you were in Savannah's position, would you have risked your professional success by leaving that first anonymous note? What would you have written to make your voice heard without revealing your identity immediately? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.